what I'm going to do, and in light of this discussion that we've heard from everyone in terms of your basic reasons for being here and your interest in being sort of at the cutting edge of change and bringing your vast knowledge and your experience and your perspectives into affecting positive change for everyone. I stand in awe of all of you, and I was just sitting there thinking, oh, keep talking so I don't have to talk so much. Maybe I don't know that much after all. But I do want to contribute in a manner this evening with you to talk about some of those misconceptions about American Indians. I'm not going to talk about the Omaha specifically. I'm going to talk about Indians in general, because American Indians have a whole different worldview. They come from a totally different perspective based upon, well, at least in the Indian people that I've had the privilege to talk with and talk to and discuss a lot of it, to answer some of the questions that are normally asked about American Indians. How come American Indians just don't melt down? How come if things are so bad on the reservation with unemployment and corruption, all these negative kinds of things, then why don't they leave? And so it's a lot of these other questions. And mascots. What's so wrong with that? I know that the Omaha tribe and the Winnebago tribe and some of the other, I think it was Santee, when Sioux City had the Fighting Sioux. Was it the Fighting Sioux? You guys remember that? In Sioux City, when they had that baseball team? And their perspective is we should be proud, and yet they portrayed an Indian with this big, huge proboscis and feathers hanging. It was a stereotype, and it was demeaning. But yet we were supposed to be proud of that. Because they're the Fighting, so we're honoring that. Well, the tribes went to bat and finally got the new name changed, or got a new name, to where when the new baseball organization came to Sioux City, now they are the Sioux City Explorers, which is okay. Because it befits a certain time wherein they're exploring. So it was as inoffensive as they could possibly get it by changing it from the Fighting Sioux. So, and they had a hard time in dealing with that. I just don't understand. Well, it's like today. It's like the guy who's owning the Washington Redskins. He doesn't want to change it. He says, I'll never change it. I'm going to leave it like that. Yet all of the talks, the hours of discussion about how offensive those kinds of names are seem to just go over. And that's because when we look at we're going to look at this epistemologies and ways of knowing, the perception of American Indians has always been portrayed as, and I go through this with my students in some of the classes that I have the privilege of teaching at our college, at the Nebraska Indian Community Colleges. Do you recognize the term savage? They'll say, yeah. Do you recognize the term migratory, migrants? Yeah. Do you recognize the term nomad? Yeah. Do you recognize the term primitive? And so I get all of these, and these are Omaha students. And this is what they have grown up, and they buy into it, that we are primitive, and that we're, savage, that we're, all these somehow just not quite as good as, or that we had to be brought up to be civilized, or that we had to be, all of these things. And so as a result, they too believe it. And then, of course, you have the boarding school experience. But all of this was set by policy from the United States because it was their perception. And then early on, I'd say the late 1800s, they began to send out, because they wanted to do treaties, they wanted to do all these other things. But they wanted to send out, they were, in the early days, ethnologists. They became anthropologists, so anthropology started out as ethnologists. So they sent out various people who were willing to go on to these savage, unexplored areas to learn about us. However, they only had one epistemology only one way of knowing, and that was the Western idea of what civilization should be, of what I don't know, all these other primitivism was. And so this found its way into the books. And then they got collaborators, they got people to help them explain this. And then when they explained it, and of course the works are somewhat classic because it did capture, at that point in time, it did capture what the cultures looked like. Now, and I also have to say this, that we all talk about the Native American culture. There is no Native American culture, singular. Right now we have at least two, three with Chris, different cultures of Native Americans in this room. So when you see that, I always tell people, add an S, because my culture is totally different from the Navajo, or the Dene, as they call themselves. Theirs is as different from the Pueblos as the Pueblos is from the Wintu in California, as we are from Ojibwe, as we are from Iroquoian, as we are from Mississippi. I mean, all of these have their own expression of the particular worldview that I'm going to talk about tonight, this other way of knowing, this whole epistemology. Now, why are we doing this? Well, because if we don't have this basic understanding, even when we make curriculum changes, even when we attempt to explain, all we do is we accept and we say, okay, well, Wynema said to change it, so okay, why? I don't know. Okay? But I'm going to share with you why. And I have to say that even as I don't talk about the Omaha cultures or Steve's culture or even Chris's culture, they will recognize, because they're tribal people, and we're going to talk about what that term means this evening, they will recognize, yeah, we do, but they may express it differently. And so how they express and the terminology and their traditions and their culture reflect that worldview of American Indians. And that particular worldview I just called Native American worldview, but the more and more I got to thinking about it and visiting with other people, I didn't do this by myself, I want you to know, but I've been in discussions with, well, Albert Black Hat just died last June from the Lakota, who was a holy man, but also a philosopher is it Albert Black Hat? White Hat. I'm sorry, I always why did I say that? And I've talked to him and had many discussions with him. So in any event, so talking with him, talking with George Tinker, who is also an interesting guy, who is Osage, which is sister tribe of the Omaha, but he's an ordained Lutheran minister who is also very traditional and understands the stuff that I'm talking about. So based upon long discussions with these two guys and others just by phone, Crow Dog, who is I have to use this term, medicine man, but he's a holy man among the Lakota from Rosebud as well. Talking with him, doing the readings on from Divine Deloria, who is also an ordained Methodist minister, who also became very traditional in his last days. He wrote a book, really an excellent one, called The World We Used to Live In. So looking and reading and talking to these kinds of people over and over again helped me put together what I'm going to show you tonight and what I teach. And I've come up with a word, a coin, because it seems to capture everything. Tink kind of agrees with me, but Albert Whitehat didn't. But it's called spiritual holism. Because one of the things that was the first perception about us is that because we weren't Christian, that we were pagans. And that we worshipped every tree, that we worshipped every brook, every huge boulder. I mean, so there's this misconception that we had all these gods. And it's creeped into early ethnological studies as well as early anthropology studies, and even up to today. But the field is changing. I have to give it credit. It is beginning to change. These are not gods, but when we look at the spiritual holism of American Indians in terms of this being a whole different worldview and epistemologies, then it begins to make more sense. So if we don't have this basic understanding of who we are as American Indians, then talking about cultures will just be an interesting exercise, saying, well, isn't it interesting? They do this. Well, isn't that interesting? Well, okay, we got incorporated in our curriculum, so isn't that interesting? They have this. Oh, well, we got to let the Pueblo kids go because they have their name days today. So they won't be here, so we'll accommodate Albuquerque Indian School. Albuquerque Public Schools, APS. Okay, let all the Pueblos from Santo Domingo go on a certain date so they can go back for their Saints' Day. But there's the Pueblos in this regard have brought together Christian belief along with traditional belief. So there's a certain part of that whole ceremony for all 19 Pueblos to where it's purely traditional, and then I think the outward expression of that the public sees is very Christian. So they've dealt with this, but older than that and more original to that is their own traditional beliefs, and they've been able to bring this together. So for Albuquerque Public School to say, okay, let the Santo Domingos go in May, earlier than that you let the San Juan kids go, I mean those kinds of accommodations, but they don't know why. They don't know where it comes from. And so I don't want us to make that same error. I want us to know why we do what we do. And even in some of my classes up in Macy and South Sioux, when we look at our culture, our own students, my own tribal members, say, yeah, they do that. How come they do that? Seems so funny. Well, because they have been taught to believe that about their own culture. One of which, and I'll get to this, but nevertheless, one of the things that Alice Fletcher, who was an early ethnologist, wrote along with our last chief's, or recognized chief's son, Francis LaFlèche, talked about the fact that daughters-in-law and fathers-in-law do not stay in each other's company. The father-in-law has no communication, doesn't even look at his daughter-in-law, and they can be in the same proximity, and he will say to his son, tell my daughter-in-law, or tell daughter-in-law such and such and such. And when you look at that and how it makes its way into the textbooks, it's like, isn't that funny? And so our students have bought into the same thing. And so I go back and I push that all away and say, I'm going to show you why. We're going to look at the real reasons why. And it goes back to being human. It goes back to human psychology. And they invented specific rules in which to behave because of a particular lifestyle, because we're tribal. Okay, so I want to bring this up. How do I do this, Julianne? Quick. So our world, the American Indian world, is based upon what I call spiritual holism. Tink and a few others said, well, yeah, that sounds good, it's all right, but we need to call it holistic, okay, which means everything is related, and it has 4 constructs: relatedness, connectedness, interdependency, and reciprocity. So anything that happens in the world, anything that comes about, it fits in one of those or more of relatedness. So how do we know then, and I really like the fact that Minnesota uses, developing relationships. Well, I can relate to that because I understand what relatedness is. We were tribes, we lived together, we weren't going anywhere, and so as human beings we have to invent ways in which to maintain peaceful relationships so that we help one another, that we cooperate with one another, and we share with one another, because if I come across something good, I'm going to share it with everyone else. I don't keep it to myself. So we're very non-materialistic in this world. So here's a holistic worldview of American Indians. Now this isn't just Omahas, it isn't just Lakota, it's not any one tribe. But every single tribe, when we look at this, they can relate to this. Okay, and I have it specifically within, you see the 4 constructs here of related. We're all related. So as an example of relatedness, we're all related because we're human beings. We're all related because if you cut us, in the famous words of Chief Standing Bear, if you cut us, we're all going to bleed red. We are related. Maybe not because we're relatives, but we're all related just by our humanity. Okay? Connectedness. We're connected to this planet. We are connected. We are made from the stars. Steve's got a very interesting, I won't make a plug for you here, Steve. He's got a very interesting exhibit down at Kaneko here in Omaha. And they depict the Pleiades, the 7 directions, which is very important to a lot of tribal cultures because they have star knowledge. How's that for primitiveness? How's that for backwardness? Star knowledge is so intricate, and it is so important that the Pawnees had it, and it isn't like it's just their knowledge, but it's stuff that they have kept up with. But knowing about the Pleiades and honoring that within their cultures and reflecting that knowledge is something that not all people understand and know. So to them it looks like, oh, isn't it interesting, some stars. They like stars, so they put them up. And those are the generalizations that we want to educate. We want to bring them along and say, yeah, they liked, geometric shapes, but those shapes mean something. And so when you have these tribes that have star knowledge, is one example, the level of sophistication in relating to that shows not only our relatedness, but our connection as being human beings just on this planet alone. So the other thing that we have, connectedness. I always like this one for women. What happens to us every 28 days? What happens to us every 28 days, women? We have our menses.
Yeah.
What happens to the earth when the moon gets really close to the oceans? What happens? The tide goes out and the tide comes in. That's connectedness. 28 days, women, we have our cycle with that moon. That's connectedness. And so this is part of this whole spiritualism, not spiritualism, but spiritual holism that I talk about, but it's part of this holistic worldview. Interdependency. Interdependency is simply this. How many of you have plants in your home? You water them, and they grow. You make sure they get the sunlight. You make sure that, if they need to be shaded, you put them in the shade. But what happens? How else are they healthy? What do they need that we have?
Carbon dioxide.
We breathe out carbon. And what do they have that we need? Oxygen. There you go, Ted. Thank you. So one without the other is not going to exist. And this is why you have the Indians down in South America so concerned with the forests. They're being cut down by, 150 acres per minute. An astounding rate of destroying one of the very sources that we as human beings are dependent upon worldwide. Those forests contribute at least 1/3 of the total oxygen on this planet. 1/3. And so once if we do away with them, hey, we better develop extra big lungs, or maybe extra small, maybe it goes the other way, so that we can have the oxygen that we need to continue on as a species. So we have interdependency here. If you kill them off, then we're not going to last very much longer. So this is the worldview of American Indians in understanding these four constructs. And finally, we have reciprocity, or that we are reciprocal with everything. And by the way, this includes absolutely everything. And you can see here where we are and where we locate ourselves. We are not the apex. We are not at the top, and then everything else flowing down. We are simply a part of everything else. Now, anthropologists say, that's... there's a term that they call that. I can't remember right now, but they label it something else, as though this was the learning. And yet American Indians, Native American people, and not just here, but also in South America and all the other indigenous populations I have found, share the same worldview. The tribes in Africa, those that have been in my audiences can relate exactly to what I'm talking about. So it's all these indigenous peoples, the Aborigines from Australia, understand these concepts very well. When I bring them out, they say, we have that, we understand that. This is, yeah. And so when we look at this holistic way, and we look at these four constructs, now they may or may not have these same four constructs. This is specific to American Indians or North American Indians. But the final one is reciprocal, or reciprocity. So how do we have reciprocity? Well, one of the things that I use is, as an example, is when the Ojibwe have a life wherein they depend upon, for their food or part of their food, something called wild rice, and it's highly prized. now, and it's been commercialized. So you get a little bit of wild rice in a package about this big called wild rice, but it's all the other rices, and then you have, maybe 10 strands of real wild rice in there that you buy for $10 a pound. Well, the Ojibwe have been ricing for centuries and centuries. And year after year, for each lake, when they go back, there's these rice stalks, and they have all this ripe, wonderful, I don't know if you've ever had it, but wild rice is just wonderful. But every fall, it's women's work primarily, and they will go in their canoes, and they will go along the sides of the lake shores where the wild rice grows, and one woman does the oaring. The other woman grabs and gets as close into those wild rice stalks. She grabs it this way. She has a stick called a ricing stick. She goes whack, and she lets go. And so all the wild rice that's ripe falls to the bottom of the boat. And so they make their way around the lake. And of course others are out there doing the same. However, the difference here is they don't take to depletion. They don't take till there's no more rice on the stalks. And not only that, but one whack is sufficient, because when those rice stalks go up, what happens now? Students, that's why I tell my students, what happens? More shakes, and it goes down into the ground. And guess what? Next year when they come back, there's rice. Year after year. So in terms of species, in terms of reciprocity here, one sustains the other. And so you have this balance, you have this approach here, because if you take all the rice off that stalk, which has happened, because it got commercialized, I'd say within the past 20 or 30 years, maybe you know better than me, Marty, but it got commercialized. And this is why you end up with like 10 or 12 wild rice things inside that little package, because and some of the lakes lost the wild rice. Why? Because it was totally denuded. Every piece of wild rice was harvested. So nothing fell back into the lakes, and so next year, no wild rice stalks. So those lakes began to dry up. So this is what we mean by reciprocity. In the manner in which ricing is done, it not only allows the continuation of the human species for sustenance and health and food, but also it allows for the reciprocal relationship between us and the plant world, to allow this particular species to continue its existence by not taking every single rice. Okay, so this is what we mean. This is my example of reciprocal. So we've got plants and trees. In other words, we have a relationship with the plant world, the plant spirit, the spirit of the plant. And so when you have this, when you live in this world and you understand it, then we begin to see why certain things, in terms of the not only their cultural expression, but in terms of how Indians feel related. I don't, just as a perfect example, I'll go to a conference, and it might not be that there's too many Indians, but boy, if I see one, I'll say, hey, first question, which tribe are you? Okay, and they'll say, oh, I'm this tribe. I'll say, oh, this tribe. And then we'll get to talking and say, oh, do you do this? Or I'll say, oh, I have to get home because I've got a big giveaway to prepare for. I'll say, oh, do you guys do that too? You guys do giveaways? We do it. How do you do yours? Knowing that we're from two different cultures. And so we have this exchange of interest because we are related, and we essentially know that. But each tribe expresses it differently, and so this is what is the basis and forms the basis for their culture. So if you look at where we are in terms of our worldview, we also have not only the four constructs in which we live on this planet, but you can see that man is only part of it. But there's all these other areas. There's the stars. We're related to the animal world. We're related to the plant world. Things that we can see, water, sun, earth. But there's another force that we don't see, and that's wind, except, say, maybe in a destructive one like a tornado. The thunder, the lightning, okay, that's power, real power. And so we understood. So where does it all come from? Where does it all come from? There is a realization and observation that, hey, this creation, this world that I as a puny human being live in was created by something far beyond our understanding. There is a creative force here, and we all have different names for it. Winnebagos are Myanmar, I think, if I have it right. There's no Winnebagos in here. Omahas is Wakanda. We have with the Dakota and Lakota people, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it's Wakantanka. So it means they're difficult names to try to translate, but you can equate it to God. And we don't even know what this power is. There's no attempt by American Indians to anthropomorphize a creative force, a creative power that made all this to happen, that in reality owns all of this. And so when we have an imbalance on the planet like we seem to be experiencing now, called global warming, that means we have taken something and have done something, or we've overused it, we've abused it, and now it's going to right itself in something called the law of harmony and balance. So it isn't as though American Indians were really, what do we call it, really ignorant, or the fact that there was no reverence for God. You want to call it God, we can. But there's no attempt to anthropomorphize God. We don't know what God is. We don't traditionally speak of God as a he, because that leaves out all the other creation, and it becomes, according to Tink, then that, he didn't say epistemological arrogance, but he said it was arrogant to equate God in our form, because we don't know. And this is a Lutheran minister talking. Okay, he says that to say that God is he leaves out the rest of creation. We can't know that. We don't know. And so American Indians never attempt. We don't know what it looks like. And so the reference to it, I know I taught at Dana, Lutheran College, for years and years. And so these is a liberal college, and so they're very religious. American Indians, we don't have religions either. And so when I would say it, they got very upset. I was threatened after 14 years of teaching there to go to the dean because I was offending their sense of religion and what was right and sacred. Well, anyway, so after 14 years I've been teaching it, and so this is the first time I was taken to be challenged. So I made my case, and they made their case, but the dean ruled in my favor. I thought, this is it. I'm not going to come back to Dana next year. No contract. But he did understand. He said it's essentially what they're doing is they are expanding their minds, they're learning, and that that I was exercising, what is it, freedom? What do you call it? Educational freedom? What is it? Exercising academic freedom. And so in my curriculum, again, I was sorry, but they were very fundamental Christians, and they made that case very, very clear to the dean, and I was offensive that God, everybody knows that God is male. And I said, well, maybe so, but what I'm saying to you as American Indians, we're saying we don't know what God is. And that's all we're saying. We don't say it's a he, we don't say it's a she, but in the traditional way, just refer to this God, Creator God, as whatever it is. So if they were uncomfortable using the word it, then we could use the word Creator God. So, and I find that even tribal people are, because they have been through the system of the dominant society and have been Christianized, therefore civilized, use the same, and get uncomfortable with that same view, or at least with the same traditions of what our worldview was originally. So I have a lot of teaching to do on the res, and so, but by the end of the course, they pretty much understand. Okay, so how do I go to the next one? Just press it. Press it, make it go blank, make it all go away.
So you're gonna just go like right here. Or
Oh,
right
okay,
here.
okay.
So for your next one.
Okay.
Just go there.
Okay. Now, in juxtaposition to this, You have the Euro-American. I put Euro-American, and I should actually just say Western thinking. And Tink has said, I've looked at your slides, I want you to revise it. Get rid of, and I forgot to do it. But he said, this is the Western mind thinking. This is Western thought. It's not just Euro-American. So I need to fix that, but it would be really, should say Western, Western thought in terms of their individualistic worldview. Now, I told you before that we are all related. We're all connected, and we have developed a way of life based upon that in terms of our tribes and our tribal relationships. What we have here in the Western mind is that man sits at the top. Man is over everything. This is the apex, the epitome of God's creation. Followed by the earth, the animals, the plants. And so I want to just take it that far, and if you'll notice there's a slight variation here between color, and that's for a purpose to show you that in terms of our creation and where we are as human beings, this is what we see and this is what we deal with. The rest of this, of course, is we as human beings make all of these others up, and we categorize them. But on the top, there is no connectedness. Man was made to oversee everything. So our sciences, particularly I think I'll just pick on the sciences, basically reinforce that until we get sick. And then we find how related we are to the germ world. It's an invisible world, and it makes us sick, and sometimes we die as a result. You can't see it, but it's attached to us because we're humans. Okay, so when we look at animals, we also include the visible and the invisible, which of course gets down to what we would call germs. So American Indians didn't have science as extrapolated as to what we think of in the Western mind, and no connectedness here, but rather it was again part of this holistic, the spiritual holism, that all things are related. We didn't create none of it. We didn't have any hand in it. But we're all related, and as I told you. However, here in the Western thought, man understands these, but is not related to the earth is an inert thing. It is not Mother Earth. Whereas for America, and suppose all of this thinking and this worldview, is the primitive. This is the one that's savage, and yet there was great reciprocity with Mother Earth and the fruits of Mother Earth in the example I just gave you with the Ojibwe. Okay, so that both species could have reciprocal and continue each other. So the earth then is an inert thing. It's a thing. We're not related to except to walk on it, plant on it what we want. If it doesn't produce, then we'll make medicines and we'll make it produce and whatever. The same whole species, I just heard on, or did I see it? I'm not sure if I read it, but that the elephant nation in Africa used to be 300 and some thousand. It is now down to, I think, like 37,000 viable, which means able to breed, that are still healthy, elephants. We're slaughtering them because they have these long, beautiful tusks, and we, as human beings, desire those tusks for whatever reason. But they're animals. They know nothing. However, they're probably, because no one can see this, because we can't know everything all the time, they're very integral to the ecology of where they live. They're a very integral part. And so if you get rid of them, and now it may happen, but whole species of animals, four-leggeds, have disappeared. The wolverines, they're more like a legend, more like a myth. What is a wolverine? Well, it was a little feisty animal, probably about this tall, that is related to the raccoon. And you know that the raccoon is very feisty. It has a really feisty, aggressive nature. Well, the wolverine did too. Wolverines would take on, I heard, wolves, bears, and anything larger than itself, and would come out a lot of times with its own life intact. Okay, might not conquer the bear, might not conquer what, but they're very, very, very aggressive and very assertive. And so, but the last wolverine, I think, was killed, gosh, way back in, I don't know, the 60s? Was it? Somewhere in there. But the wolverine is now a memory. But the wolverine also had a particular niche in the whole animal world. They kept the population down. They're very opportunistic, so they were part of what my sister and I call the cleanup committee, Nature's Cleanup Committee, which consists of vultures and anything that goes in and cleans up carrion, because it keeps a disease down. It keeps the planet healthy. It keeps us as human beings healthy. And so, when you see these on, National Geographic, you see those vultures just put their head in this, and it's all wormy and ugly and whatever. They come out and, oh, yum, yum. These guys are part of the cleanup committee. That's what they do. And that's what keeps us healthy, because dead carcasses that don't decay, or if they're decaying, are capable of spreading diseases that will spread to us. And so when you have this relationship and this I guess, recognition of what each species does, then you begin to see why American Indians don't melt down. We don't. I'm not going to move off my reservation. Life's too hard out there. It might be hard on my reservation, but it's hard here too. I don't want to pay my taxes to Nebraska. I don't want to pay. You guys have to pay them because you're urban, right? But when you're on Nebraska, you get certain tax breaks, since all it is income. Okay, but I'm getting too deep and too far too quickly. But the rest of these, when you look at religion is separate. You have science, which is separate. You have your work. You have wealth. And then we have family. And then you have your associates. And of course we have wellness, our health. Then we have art, which is different, and we have entertainment. So all of those are separate and compartmentalized. And spirituality is generally associated only with religion. Whereas American Indians, when I told you earlier, and I think Albert Whitehead said this, is we don't have a religion. American Indians, we don't. And this is my discussions with him and Tink, and I never got to meet Vine Deloria, but I did all his readings. But the thing of it is that spirituality infuses and is such a basic part of everything that American Indians do. There's just no part of our lives, in the traditional sense, that we can separate ourselves from God. We believe, and traditionally, that everything that the Creator created, just simply by the creation, and if we regard God and the Creator as holy, then if we're part of that creation, then you and me, guess what? We're holy. We are already holy. Okay, so you have this, of course you have centuries and centuries of Western religious thinking that has come to help civilize American Indians, when American Indians didn't need it at all. And so when we look at, I'm going to pick on the Plains tribes with the pipe, and the pipe ceremonies, and the recognition of certain substances that were holy because they're created and they're very fragrant, and they offer a visible way in which to communicate with the Creator, with Creator God. And that is tobacco, cedar, sage, and sweetgrass. And so those four substances, because they are natural, as Steve had mentioned earlier in his art. So those four substances are are considered sacred by the Plains tribes, because this is what we use to communicate with the Creator God. And that comes off as being superstitious. That comes out, I'm going to tell you a superstitious story. Now maybe my relatives here can refute this. Let me ask them now. Do any of you know of any American Indians that caught, was it the bird flu from a few years, H1N1? Was it N1? Do you guys know of anybody that caught, any Indian people that caught that and died? I don't either. However, let me tell you why. The Lakota people, when they knew that this disease was out there and it was very fatal to the young children, it was very fatal to the elderly, had their holy men get together, and there was a big prayer service. And I was fortunate enough to go to it. And that prayer service was so, and maybe this is too narrow, but what they prayed for was that they started out with their nation, that no Lakota or Dakota people anywhere, and then they expanded to all the other tribes on the continent, would die or contract this horrible flu. That was the purpose of coming together and praying this way with the pipe. Pipe is very sacred because it brings the visible world and the invisible together. And so your prayers then go directly to Wakanda, or that's our word for God. And so after this, and there was a lot of tribal people there, a lot of different other tribes. I know that I was there. And so we all prayed for this, for the protection, because Indian health, which a lot of people think, oh, they get special health. We don't. But Indian health would have been totally overrun if this flu would have taken a hold of tribal people on the reservations. Plus, we only have one hospital for like 3 or 4 reservations, and they're generally very far away. And so there was a lot of fear that this flu would just decimate Indian people, the Indian populations. Because we also know that first contact with Europeans, we didn't have defenses much against common measles. What else do we? Measles, you can probably help, smallpox, and a couple of others. We didn't have defenses against those. And so this flu represented a new wave of some sort of disease that we would be defenseless against. Because traditionally, and if you look around nationally, tribes are very poor, except for those with casinos. And even then, they're not that rich either. But nevertheless, so this prayer was said. And then it was said for the whole nation, in that maybe if it has to come, that it shouldn't be as bad. But because Indian people have already given so much, their land, they have given up their history, their languages, all these cultures. So this prayer, and different people prayed for different aspects. It just went around. Everybody says an individual prayer. You start at sundown, and you might get out by 1 or 2 in the morning. Okay, so this is the kind of prayer service, but every voice is heard. And pipes are then smoked to consecrate that particular prayer. Well, as far as I know, no Indian person has had H1N1. And I checked, believe me, I asked tribes, anybody here, contact H1N1? No. And that's because there was this special prayer meeting where the pipes were brought, and there were a bunch of pipes, probably from here to the end of that table. The different people and the different tribes brought their pipes, because the pipe represents bringing the physical world with the invisible. And when you put that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the chanupa, which is the tobacco, inside there, even the tobacco is sacred. So it's one of our sacred substances: tobacco, cedar, sage, and sweetgrass. So this was and as far as I know, on our reservation, Mike, or do you know of anybody who got H1N1? Or if they did they perish? No. So I would say that worked. Okay, so that direct conduit to Wakanda, which is our word for God, the Creator, which is, actually we can't explain it because it's so beyond our comprehension. We don't claim to know that creative power. We don't claim to have a personal relationship with it. But we can ask for personal help. And that's all you can ask for, is help and good health. There's only 2 things that matter to us as humans, as a human species. So when we had this pipe ceremony and asked for protection for all Indian peoples, because we've already given up our land, right? We know the history. We've already given up, a lot. So here we are. Pitiful people, this is all, so we ask for special protection that this particular disease not take anyone. And I have yet to run into an audience of Indian people to say, did H1N1 touch you guys? Did anybody die for it? And every single response I've had so far has been no. And yet, there were, I think old people were particularly susceptible to this, and the young people, and everybody in between. But nevertheless, this is where we come from, and so we don't compartmentalize our spirituality, and it's not just in one area called religion. It permeates absolutely every aspect of our lives, so that everything becomes holy. You are holy. There's no such concepts of things like original sin, well, it's totally absent. And just because it's absent doesn't mean that we are primitive or that our thinking is primitive or backward. I often think, boy, if we could have just come together in a much better way, particularly with the early colonial thought and stuff, boy, we might have a really, really wonderful, not that we don't have a good country, but think how highly evolved we might even be. Because I think working together would equal this evolutionary thought. But we were put down as superstitious, that we worshipped every blade of grass and tree and what we didn't. We understood that there was a spiritual power for it to exist, and we still do. Now, that doesn't mean every American Indian that you see. Many are Christians, many are, of course, highly educated, believe me. But the old ways, in terms of who we are and how we relate, resonate throughout other tribal groups throughout the world. Particularly with regard to spirituality, regard for the aged, regard for, just a whole lot of things that are so very similar. So when we begin to compartmentalize and separate this is where our societies fall apart. So we have suffered a lot in terms of demise of family due to drugs, alcoholism, and all the social ills. And they're concentrated because, particularly on the reservations, it is so obviously apparent. It happens in the cities as well, but Indian people have really psychologically not adapted yet to 200 years of contact. We're learning. So you can also find very highly educated Indian people like Dr. George Tinker, PhD, also a traditional healer among his people, the Osages, the Wajaje. You see, well, of course, he's gone now, Albert Whitehat, who taught up at Sintegleshka in Rosebud, South Dakota. And you have a number, Lame Deer with is he Northern Cheyenne, I think. So you have all these traditional teachers who hold on to those traditional ways. And even though it might be tribally specific, overall it affects all of the people. That is a reflection of all of the tribal people's lives. So now when you look at the two worldviews, you have one worldview which permeates everything, and then you have the American Indian worldview. And of course all the different cultures that express this in various different ways reflects the same worldview of spiritual holism, because you can't do anything without the power of spirit, period. And so if that's the case, then everyone that you see, everyone that you meet is endowed with holiness already. So the religion point of view is that you come in, you're sinful, all of these other things, and please forgive me if I sound like I'm, trying to put this down. I'm not. All I'm doing is talking about the two different worldviews here, is that you're sinful, and that even babies, if they're not baptized, then they're not saved. Well, American Indians don't have that. You're already holy. You're already sacred. Simply because you exist, because nothing can exist without the will and the power of what we call the creative power, the spirit. Our word for it among the Omahas is Wakanda. So this is the overall holistic worldview, and then how we contrast this with, because everything is related, okay, everything is connected, everything is, what was my other third one? Relatedness, connectedness, interdependent, one upon the other. And finally, reciprocal. What you do to Mother Earth, you do to yourself. And if we don't understand that connectedness, it was not given to us to do with as we please, this creation. It was given to us to live and to flourish. And that's all. So we as a human species have if there was one commandment, that commandment was to live, to perpetrate yourselves, and to do the best you can. So basically, this is why when I coined the term spiritual holism, Tink likes it. I'm really glad, because he's well known. Albert didn't. no, it's more than that. So, and it probably is, but I had agreement from one. So this, and a lot of people have a hard time in coming to terms with this. Their first idea is because it is so ingrained in them that American Indians are primitive, that American Indians are savage, that American Indians, you know, we just have a lot to learn and get caught up on just to be human, that it's very difficult for them to understand this. And even tribal people, I don't just mean my tribe, but tribes throughout the United States, they're people who are a result or progeny of people who were subjected to the boarding school experience. And not that it was bad, not that it was bad because they also became educated, but who have grown up with those very same kinds of teaching. So you have a mix of people in our societies. You have Christian Indians and you have traditional Indians. And so, but we're still one people, we're still one tribe, we still have one culture. But we diverge, I suppose, in terms of spiritual holism because they go for, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, I'm simply showing you where American Indians come from. And this was their traditional thought, and of course there's a lot more than this. So I'm not gonna, I think I'm just gonna do these two here because time is getting away from us and I want you to hear from the other side of American Indians. So we've only looked at us. Anthropology generally goes just for the cultural aspect of it. But there's another part of us, and that's only half of us. So if we look at the other legal part, that's Marty's. I'm going to let him talk about that. So I thank you very much, and we'll answer questions and whatever later on. Okay, a break. Thank you. Thank you.